next Tuesday.
The world goes on.
It's Fleet Week.
It's chaos.
Fun police.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit him. All right. At least nobody got hurt. You were saying?
NCIS is all new. CBS next Tuesday.
Special Agent Gibbs, NIS.
Hello everyone, welcome to back my channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before starting the video, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and give this video a thumbs up. It's time to stand up in today's Mariska Hargitay comforts Chris Meloni. I need a Mariska Hargitay comforts Chris Meloni after organized crime, cancellation 1900-word paragraph. Here is a single, continuous 1900-word paragraph as requested, capturing the imagined moment of comfort between Mariska Hargitay and Chris Meloni following the cancellation of Law and Order, organized crime. The news had broken like a shockwave through the Midtown Manhattan set, a brutal April Fool's irony that no one had scripted, and in the sudden, hollow quiet of the soundstage, Christopher Meloni stood utterly still, a monolith of coiled tension and disbelief, staring at the phantom marks on the floor where Elliot Stabler had paced just hours before. He had given that role everything, 23 years of fractured loyalty, of rage barely leashed, of a jaw that could crack granite and eyes that could betray a universe of hurt in a single frame, and now the network had simply decided, in a boardroom somewhere far from the grit and the blood and the sacred chaos of a New York precinct, that Stabler's story would end not with a bang, not with a final, roaring redemption, but with a quiet, cowardly fizzle, a line item on a quarterly spreadsheet. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, a frantic symphony of well-wishers and reporters, but Chris silenced it without looking, because the only voice he needed to hear was already weaving through the maze of lighting rigs and abandoned craft services tables, her boots clicking a determined rhythm against the cold concrete. Mariska Hargitay had felt it before she saw it, that seismic shift in the universe they had co-created. She was still in her Benson vest, her badge catching the sickly yellow of the work lights, and as she rounded the corner into the dim corner of the stage where Chris had retreated, her heart cracked clean in two. He was leaning against a steel beam, arms crossed so tightly it looked as if he were holding himself together by sheer force of will, his knuckles white, his famous blue eyes not hard with anger but lost, the look she had only seen once before, years ago, when a young cast member had died suddenly, and the absurdity of their fictional violence had collided with real, unanswerable grief. She didn't say a word, not at first, because Mariska had learned long ago that Chris didn't need platitudes or the hollow reassurances that television was just television. He needed her presence, the wordless language of two survivors who had bled, literally and metaphorically, for this universe. She walked straight into his space, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him, close enough to smell his familiar scent of leather and coffee and that particular mix of old-school masculinity and unexpected tenderness, and she simply placed one warm palm flat against his chest, right over his heart, which was hammering like a caged animal. That touch, that small but deliberate anchor, finally broke something in him. His jaw unclenched, a shuddering breath escaped his lips, and his arms unfolded to pull her into a hug so fierce and encompassing that it felt less like an embrace and more like a man drowning grabbing the only lifeboat in a stormy sea. Mariska, who had held countless victims, survivors, and lost souls in her 35 years as Olivia Benson, held him just as tightly, her fingers splaying across the broad expanse of his back, her cheek pressed to his shoulder, absorbing his tremor. "I know," she whispered into the fabric of his Henley, her voice thick and raw, because she did know. She knew the sleepless nights he had poured into developing Stabler's traumatic past, the way he had fought for every gritty, uncomfortable scene that showed a man unlearning toxic masculinity piece by agonizing piece, the pride he'd taken in building a spin-off that was not a cheap copy of SVU but a darker, more serialized beast, a love letter to procedural noir that had found its own devoted tribe of viewers. She knew, too, the particular sting of cancellation that hadn't come because the work was bad, but because of corporate merging, shifting priorities, the cold arithmetic of streaming numbers and demographics that had nothing to do with art or the sacred pact between a show and its audience. Chris didn't cry. He was too stubborn, too old school, too New York for that in a public space, even a mostly empty one, but his forehead dropped to her shoulder, and she felt the wet heat of his breath, the ragged, unsteady rhythm of a man fighting for composure. "We didn't get to finish," he finally rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper that was pure Stabler and pure Chris, indistinguishable now after all these years. "We had a plan, Mariska. A real ending. Closure for him. For us." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and in his eyes she saw the ghost of Elliot Stabler's abandonment, the way he had walked out on her in 2011 without so much as a goodbye, leaving a wound that had taken a decade to suture, and now, cruelly, history was repeating itself, but this time it was the network, not his own demons, stealing the final chapter. Mariska cupped his jaw with both hands, a mother and a partner and a sister all at once, her thumbs brushing the stubble along his cheekbones with a tenderness that transcended any script they had ever been given. "Listen to me, Christopher," she said, her voice low and fierce, the same commanding undertone that made Benson the most respected lieutenant in the NYPD. "You finished, you hear me? You finished every single day that you walked onto this set. You took a broken, violent, grieving man and you made him whole. You made him try. You gave survivors a hero who was messy and angry and imperfect, and that was more real, more honest, than any neat, tied-in-a-bow finale they could have written." She paused, her own eyes stinging now, because this